because I know deep within me that I love each one of you the same.
Welcome to Happily Ever Reality. I am so glad you're here. Today we're talking about My 5 Wives, Season 1, Episodes 10 and 11. These are the last two episodes of Season 1. Episode 11 is the tell-all, and Episode 10 is an episode where they do questions and answers. So these are going to be a little bit different. If you haven't already watched my videos about this show, I'm going to go ahead and put a link up on the screen so you can go over to the playlist and watch some of the other videos. But otherwise, that is it. Let's go ahead and get started. The show starts off with the whole family coming together over at Rosemary's house to answer questions that have been submitted by fans. The first set of questions is for kids of all ages, so everyone is there. And once they're all together, they take turns answering questions. The kids start off by answering some questions that have been submitted about their pets. And then they're asked if they like being on TV. And a few of them answer. And the answer is all the same. Yes, they like being on TV. And the simple answer to this is they like it because they're going to show the world all about what it's like to be in a polygamous family. There is also a question about if the kids feel like they get enough attention from their dad. 3 of the kids end up answering, and they say that most of the time they do, but every now and then it feels like they don't get enough attention. Josh, the oldest son, says that he feels like they get enough, and he understands that Brady is doing the best that he can. Now, I'm not going to go through every question that the kids get asked because there's just questions about things like if they have nicknames, what they want to be when they grow up. There's some questions about how their friends react to their family being, a polygamous family. There's a question about which mom is a better cook. They're all just very kid-friendly questions, and none of the answers were surprising. There is a point where one of the older kids talks about how when she was younger, that the mothers encouraged them all to not tell that they were polygamist, to sort of avoid those conversations about their lifestyle. But now that they're on TV, they're able to be a lot more open about having, multiple mother figures and about the lifestyle their family lives. So this has been a big change for the way the kids are actually living. There's also this conversation where they're asked a question about if they all get along. There's a lot of kids in this family, and they all agree that they get along better with the siblings that are not in the same household. So they get along better with the people they don't have to live with, which makes sense. After this, they do questions for the kids that are 13 and over, so they ask all of the younger kids to leave the room. The first question is a polygamist classic. Do the kids want to grow up and be polygamist? Overall, the answer is no from every kid. These kids have witnessed the difficulties. Just like the Brown kids over on Sister Wives, they don't want to grow up and be polygamist. Now, the kids in this family mention that it's way too hard on everyone, that it's too expensive, and Josh says that he doesn't think he can handle multiple relationships. Now, there is one boy that brings up something positive about being polygamist, and that it's really fun for the kids, but it's still a no. Now, I don't think that answer was surprising. Again, we've seen that with the Brown kids. Polygamy, this whole lifestyle is just too hard. It's hard on everyone. There are some questions also related to whether or not the kids have jobs, or I should say the teenagers. These are all teenagers. Do they have jobs? Are they dating? Or do they share a car? Just some of the questions you might ask a teenager. After this, the teenagers are asked to leave the room, and it is just Brady and the wives that are left. And they're going to answer some questions on their own, and I have to tell you, it gets a little more interesting here. The first question is, why did the wives choose polygamy? Robin joked that it was because she fell in love with a guy that was already married, but Rosemary gives a little bit more of a serious answer.
I felt like it was a choice at the time because I did choose, but the choice was based on a condition that I thought I had to.
So Rosemary is saying that at the time she thought she chose this, but it had conditions. And let's get real, the condition here is if you choose polygamy, you get to go to heaven. And if you don't, you're not going. That's not really that much of a choice. And I'm sure all of these women realize that now, since they have left that faith and they're no longer in the AUB, I'm sure they realized this wasn't really that much of a choice. The next question is, why did they say yes to the TV show? And they give the same answer that the Browns give on Sister Wives, back in the early seasons. They basically say that they want to show the world, how polygamists live. They want to make it more acceptable so that people don't have to hide it. They don't want people to have to feel ashamed. Brady says that being on the TV show makes him feel much freer, and the only concern from him was the kids. Like, he was all about being on the show. He only worried about how it would affect the kids. Noni, on the other hand, was really afraid of the family being broken up or them somehow ending up separated. She was really worried that they would not get to stay together. There is a question that I found interesting, and it was, why do you stay if you are no longer in the faith? Like, why do you continue to do this? And Polly gives an answer, and she basically says, I choose to still be here. And that's sort of what they all say. Like, they choose this now. They care about each other. They love each other. They love each other's children. They don't want to leave this family. But then it sort of turns around and gets directed at Brady, and he says that he chooses all of them. He loves all of them. But Rhonda goes a bit further and says, would you really have chose this, though? Would you really have chose to be a polygamist if you were not in the AUB?
I was part of a culture, I was part of a society that you're expected to live polygamy. But all of you were just for love. I really believe that.
I do think that Brady Williams genuinely loves all of these women, and I think they all care about each other. I think this seems to be a real working polygamous family. It has its issues. It's not perfect. And maybe they would have all chose differently had they not been raised the way they were. But I do think they seem to care about each other. But Robin pushes this a little further. She basically says, if you were in the AUB, I don't think you would have allowed yourself to love another woman.
I don't think you would have allowed yourself to fall in love again and again and again if you weren't part of this culture. You never would have even gone there.
Absolutely. Yep.
The reason I wanted to add that is because when you're watching shows like Sister Wives or any other sort of show where there's a man who is wanting multiple wives, sometimes it seems like it's really about their ego and their inability to be monogamous. But that is not the feeling I get with Brady. I do think he would have been just fine in a monogamous marriage. So I think at this point, he's choosing to be with these women because he loves them and he made a commitment to them. But I think had he not been in the AUB, I think he would have been a monogamous partner. He would have just wanted one wife. There is a question about whether or not they felt forced into it. Did they feel like they were tricked into being polygamist? All of the women say no. They don't feel like that was the case. They feel like their families believe they were making the right choice for them when they were leading them that way. And, so it's one of those situations where I think they don't want the same for their kids, but they also don't resent their own parents because they understand that their parents were making a faith-based decision and their parents thought they were making the right choice, leading them in that direction. Rosemary points out that she thinks her parents, or she knows that her parents were worried about her salvation when they were making the choices they did when they were parenting her. So that is sort of the perspective of everyone there. I will put in a little clip here of Robin talking about how she felt like she wasn't allowed to make her own decisions. So she was the only wife who really said she felt like she wasn't allowed to think on her own. So I'm going to put in a clip of that here.
I do feel like I was not really allowed or encouraged to think for myself in a lot of ways, though. It was like they loved me, they wanted this for me, but I better do this.
She goes on to say that she didn't feel like she was tricked, but she did feel like she was led in a very specific direction, and she doesn't want that for her children. There is a question about if Brady wanted to take another wife, would that be okay? And basically all of the wives say, no, not at this point. I think they're past the point of wanting someone new in the family. The only person that is really open to it is Rhonda. And then, of course, they reverse that question and they ask Brady, what if a wife wanted another husband? And, of course, he basically says, no. Would not happen. Brady admits that he would just be way too jealous for that. That is not something that he would be into or be comfortable with at all. There are more questions, but I'm just trying to highlight some of the ones that I thought were more interesting. I do recommend watching, even if you're not into watching all of the episodes of the show, you could sort of go into episode 10 and episode 11 and really get a feel for the family and who they are. And, they give you a lot of information in these 2 episodes, but there's no way I could just cover every question and answer that they gave. So these are the ones that stood out to me. There is a point after this where Brady is asked to leave, and it is just the wives, and they are alone without him. There's a question about if their relationship with Brady is really enough for them. Of course, they all say yes, Brady is enough. And then there's a question about if all of the wives are really close, or if some of the wives are closer than others. They give the answer that I expected. They say that personality makes a difference, so some of the wives are closer, and it also depends on what is actually going on in their lives. So they may connect more with another wife if there's a specific thing going on where they relate more to each other at that point, and then that may change later on. There also ends up being a question about any rivalry between them. Are they rivals or are they like sisters? And they say both. There's a little bit of both in those relationships that they have with each other. There also ends up being a question about life after kids. This is always a huge thing for me because when I watch Sister Wives, I'm like, I could not imagine all of those wives and Cody, hanging out and just having a life without children. I couldn't have seen that for them. So I thought it was interesting that it was brought up with the Williams family, and the wives say that they hope that they get to travel when the kids are gone. I'm guessing that they really don't travel much, both from the expense side. I'm sure it's really expensive to travel with all those kids, and the logistics of traveling with that many people. So they don't get to travel much, and they are looking forward to that. They want to travel and go on a lot of cruises. So they are clearly thinking about what that is going to look like for them. To me, that question is just important too, because I think, in a polygamous family, the kids can distract from the fact that the relationship between the husband and the wives is not enough and isn't fulfilling. So the kids are there and the wives don't notice. And then, the kids grow up and move away, and then they notice that that relationship wasn't what they needed. And you know what? I'm saying polygamous families, let's get real. That happens with monogamous relationships too. I just think it could be worse with polygamist. So I think it was important that that question got brought up. After that, the wives, Brady comes back. The wife only time is over. And so the questions aren't really deep at that point. They're sort of lighter questions. They ask about Brady getting a tattoo. They ask if Brady can name all the kids in order, he can. He knows all of the kids and he can give their names in order. They ask about his employment. He's self-employed. They talk about saving money by couponing and yard selling, and it's just lighter stuff at the end. And then there ends up being a question about how would the family feel if one of the children came out as homosexual, and they all say that they would be okay with it. But I want you to hear Noni's answer. I wanted to put this in here.
No matter what.
I would not want them to hide it.
Right.
For the same reasons, I did not want to hide our lifestyle. It's too miserable.
I thought it was interesting that she was able to take their experience and sort of apply it in this situation and think about how it would feel to have to hide a relationship. And, she doesn't want that for her children or for anyone. She was miserable when they had to hide who they were in their relationships, and she doesn't want anyone to have to feel that way. So I just thought that was very insightful of her to say that and make that comment, and I wanted to make sure I threw that in there. There ends up being a question about favoritism. How does Brady avoid favoritism? And he says you have to avoid it. You have to do it. But what he can't avoid is that, fairness. Things aren't always fair. But he doesn't have a favorite. He says that he loves all of them the same. The show ends with some intimacy-related questions. I'm going to sum up the answers to all of those questions. Basically, they stay out of each other's business. They don't want to hear sounds from each other's homes. They don't want to know what things are going on between Brady and the other women. And I think that's a combination of not wanting to think about it and sort of respecting each other's privacy. And that is where the show ends. That is it for episode 10. It was a good one. I liked them sitting and talking. They seemed really open to answering the questions and being honest. So the next episode is the tell-all, and I was excited to see the host was Tamron Hall. The tell-all with Tamron starts off with Tamron asking why did they want to go on the show? Why did they want to show? And Brady says that they wanted to show a good, healthy, polygamous family that doesn't rely on religion. During this time, we also find out that Polly hasn't watched any of the show because she doesn't want to see how Brady is behind closed doors with the other wives, which is understandable. I think that, we've seen this before. They don't want to know too much about the other relationships. So that is why Polly cannot watch the show. Tamron immediately asks about equality by bringing up the issues that happened with Rosemary and Polly. Earlier in season 1, we had seen where Rosemary said every time that Brady was over, it seemed like Polly would call and need him for some reason. And it felt like Polly was interfering with her time with Brady. And Rosemary said it was something that had been going on for years. It seemed like Polly just always was interfering with their time. So when Tamron brings this up, Rosemary responds by saying that her and Polly had talked about it. And, it's no longer an issue. She understands that Polly isn't doing this intentionally. But Rosemary was asked what it was like between the two of them now. So basically Tamron says, how are things between you and Polly at this point? And Rosemary starts to answer, but she gets really teary-eyed. And it just seemed like it was really difficult for her to talk about her and Polly. And then Tamron says this.
Her eyes are tearing up. So that makes me feel like either this was not resolved or you're not telling me the whole story.
See, that is why I love when she hosts. I just want her to do all of the tell-alls. She gets right to it. She just says what we're all thinking. There's something not right there. Things must have not been resolved. Now, Polly says that she thought the issue was handled, but then she says maybe it wasn't actually resolved for Rosemary. And then Tamron asks if it was resolved or if it's still a work in progress, and Rosemary says it's a work in progress. So we can see there are still issues there, which doesn't really surprise me. If something has been going on for years, you don't get over it after one conversation or just overnight. I think Rosemary is really hurt. I think she believes Brady wants to spend more time with Polly, and they are gonna have to work on that. Tamron asks if they have ever thought about leaving. Have any of the wives ever thought about just leaving this relationship? Rhonda says definitely. There have been times for her. And Polly says that she thought about leaving when they left the religion. When they left that faith and it was no longer something they had to do to get to heaven, she thought about leaving. And she decided at that point, she was going to need to make a decision about whether or not it was worth it to stay. And she thought it was worth it. She loved them. She loved this family. It was worth it to her. Next, money is brought up, and Brady says that for years, the construction business had done really well. But when the recession hit the business, the wives had to all pitch in to help. That is why they are all working now, or they're all going back to school. Since they are talking about working and money, it is brought up how do you handle your finances? So we find out that they have a central bank account and the money is all put in there and then divided between the wives. And then the wives will get more depending on how many kids they have at home. And then after that, they move on to talking about how they would like to move. Now, remember earlier in this season, we found out they were living in an AUB community. Because they no longer follow that faith, they feel uncomfortable. So during this season, Brady and the wives had all talked about moving, and there was a part of the show where Brady and Rhonda went on a trip and they looked at some property that was for sale while they were there. They just looked, they weren't putting in any offers. It wasn't super serious, but some of the other wives got upset because they said they felt like Rhonda and Brady were choosing for them, choosing where they were going to live. So this is brought up. We find out, Brady says it wasn't that serious. We were just looking at properties. It wasn't that big of a deal. And based on the reactions the wives have during the tell-all, it seems like they now realize it wasn't that big of a deal. Brady and Rhonda were not going to go and make any offers or try to get a property. It wasn't a decision that was serious. They were just looking while they were there on a trip. So no one seems upset about it now. But after this, they do bring up something that was very upsetting during this season, and that is the safe talks that Brady wanted the wives to have. He was really wanting them to communicate more with each other. He was tired of them bringing all of the problems to him. He wanted them to work on them, with each other, so he didn't have to be involved. So he decided to come up with this thing called a safe talk, where you sat down with someone and you were able to say what you were feeling, and that other person shouldn't be defensive, and you really communicate with each other.
We just always have gone to Brady when we've had an issue. And Brady just thought, hey, if you guys start talking to each other more instead of always going through me, it'll, create this stronger bond. And
if you go back and watch the earlier episodes in this season, or listen to my videos from, about the earlier episodes, Polly had a safe talk about a bill, like paying a bill with Noni. Noni did not take this well at all. She was really, really upset. She was super defensive. She argued with Brady afterwards. I should back up a little bit. She was calm with Polly. It was really tense, but she did stay calm. It was with Brady where she was so upset. She was so upset with him. Yeah, I'm going to put a clip in of her talking to Brady, really yelling at Brady about what happened.
I react, accept it or lump it. Don't change me.
Noni says she was upset because her feelings were hurt and she felt really misunderstood. Tamron asked Polly how she felt seeing Noni's reaction in the argument she had with Brady, and Polly says she was really surprised by this reaction. Both wives agree that everything is resolved now and that they actually have a really good relationship. Brady says they're still going to work on communicating, but they're not going to have any talks that are called safe talks anymore. From there, they switch over to talking about Robin's ring. Now, this is something that was brought up during episodes 8 and 9, so if you haven't watched that video, this isn't going to make a lot of sense, but basically, Robin really, really got her feelings hurt. She felt like Brady had started a tradition of giving a ring to each wife on their 20th anniversary, and it was supposed to be sort of a surprise. He was supposed to go and get it for them, and she had been with him when he had bought Polly's ring, and he had been really excited. But then when it was time for him to do it for her, he didn't do it. So their 20th anniversary rolled around and there was no ring. So she really, really got her feelings hurt. And so that is brought up here. Even during the tell-all, when Robin is talking about it, you can tell she is just very hurt. Brady does end up explaining what happened and why he didn't have the ring for her. So I'm going to put a clip in here of him talking.
Going through a really tough time in the company, in the business, and I was completely distracted, and it got away from me how close the anniversary was getting. Did I intentionally try to hurt Robin? Of course not. I wanted her to feel special and all of that. I was just dumb.
Even though Brady has an excuse, it's not one that's actually going to make Rhonda feel better. Brady hasn't actually done anything to make it up for her. Now, remember, he took the ring back and said he was going to make it better. We find out that he hasn't yet. So he's definitely going to need to follow through with what he said because Robin is still very hurt. After this, they end up talking more about having a baby. Early in this show, that was something that was brought up a lot. Rhonda wants to adopt and Noni wants to actually have another child. Brady agreed to try to have a baby with Noni. Noni ended up telling Rhonda that they were going to try, but didn't tell anyone else. So the only person who knew that Brady and Noni were going to have another baby was Rhonda. So Rosemary brings that up. She brings up the fact that she didn't know until it was televised. So they found out when it was airing that Brady and Noni were trying for a baby. Noni says that it's because she wanted the show to be authentic. They wouldn't normally share that they were trying to conceive, so why would they do it just because they were filming? She didn't want to change anything for the show. And after this, birth control is brought up. Early in the season, we had seen the wives talking about birth control, and you could tell not all of them were very comfortable. And even though they're okay with using it now, they haven't always been. During their time in the AUB, birth control was completely unacceptable. So Noni and Polly really struggled with that conversation that happened early in the show. Noni explains why.
We've been raised that was wrong. That was wrong to prevent having children. We all love our families and still want to be accepted by them, and we have a relationship with them, and we don't want to make it awkward for them either. And, you know, for them to know that is kind of one of those, another thing that they would be disappointed in.
After this, the tattoo is brought up. Remember, this is something that once would have been unacceptable because of their faith, but now Brady has this new tattoo. All of the wives had warmed up to the idea of the tattoo. They didn't love the tree design, but they say they're starting to like it now. They moved from the tattoo to talking about Rhonda's concerns about having breast cancer. Remember, Rhonda had really struggled because she had been brought up to believe that God would heal you if you were a good person and had faith, and you would be blessed and be healed. And here she is worrying that she might have breast cancer, but she's making the decision to go through with treatments. And this was something she was really, I don't want to say she was conflicted about. I think she knew exactly what she wanted to do, but it's still, I think it brought up a lot of emotions for her. I'm going to put in a clip of her talking about that here.
And I'm sorry. You think that God will heal you, and sometimes, I'm not saying he never does, but you need to do whatever you can, and with all the information that is out there, to fight that.
I was really proud of Rhonda for pursuing medical treatment. It wasn't a light decision for her. There was an episode where she said, I feel like a bad person. If I was a good person, God would heal me, because that is what she was taught. And she had to overcome those feelings and decide to do what was best for her family and for her kids and for herself. So this wasn't just a little decision or a decision that most of us would make easily. There was more to it. And I think that's what this show is really about. You're watching this family and they're living their everyday lives and we're seeing their relationships. But these people are moving away from a very oppressive religion and organization. And they're trying to, live in a way with more modern thinking, where there's equality, where they can have birth control, where there's equality between gender and races. They're really changing their way of thinking, and I enjoyed watching it. I've enjoyed this season of the show. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, and if you haven't already, go ahead and click like and subscribe. I hope you come back to Happily Ever Reality.